The story of the Fitzhugh couple began in the 1960s when they got married. Christine Fitzhugh and Kenneth Carroll Fitzhugh became parents to two wonderful children, Justin and John. Family could be considered a model example of a happy marriage. On the outside, it seemed as if everything was perfect for them and their children. Against this backdrop, the events that occurred after more than 3 decades of their life together seem all the more shocking. Kenneth Fitzhugh lived with his wife Christine and their children in a house in Palo Alto, California, USA, a small town with about 65,000 inhabitants, located between San Francisco and San Jose. It was an upscale neighborhood in a small but famous and cozy town that a wealthy family could afford. Palo Alto is the unofficial capital of Silicon Valley in America. This city is the birthplace and headquarters of many famous companies, including Hewlett-Packard, Xerox, Facebook, Apple, and Tesla. Kenneth, the husband, was involved in business and made one successful real estate deal after another. In his spare time, the man worked part-time as a paralegal. His wife was a music teacher and also socially active, often volunteering in various social movements. Her husband was charismatic, friendly, and had a good sense of humor. Christine always looked beautiful, day and night, and kept fit through regular exercise. The family led an active lifestyle and loved spending weekends outdoors where they enjoyed quad biking. Their children were grown and lived separately from them. Despite their high income, they were quite modest and never refused to help their neighbors. For example, Kenneth regularly helped many people in the neighborhood by setting up and repairing computers for free. Family idyll lasted until May 5, 2000. The day began for the Fitzhughs in the usual way. Christine woke up at 6 a.m., had a cup of coffee, and at 7 a.m., she and her husband went jogging. At 7:45 a.m., they returned, showered, and got ready for work. Christine left for the music school around 10 a.m., driving her silver BMW there. The drive to work took about 10 minutes, and classes began at 10:20 a.m. The husband left the house an hour later. He had to go to a new property about 45 minutes away from the house to assess the prospects of buying it for a new client. The man spent about an hour on the property inspecting it. Around the same time, Christine went to a cafe during her lunch break after her class, where she got herself a coffee and some buns around 11:30 a.m. At 11 a.m., FedEx delivery man arrived at the husband's house with a package that Christine had previously ordered, but no one answered the door, even though Christine was supposed to be home during her lunch break to meet the delivery man. He left without waiting for a response. Christine's next class was supposed to begin at 12:50 p.m., but she didn't arrive at the school. This had never happened before. The woman was very responsible. The puzzled students contacted the school administration. The principal tried to call Christine, but she didn't answer the phone. Then, around 1 p.m., the principal called Christine's husband and informed him that his wife was absent from work. The principal was concerned because the woman had never been so absent before. The husband was also surprised to hear this because his wife hadn't planned anything at that time and shouldn't have been missing. She was in a good mood in the morning and felt fine. What could have caused her not to go to work that afternoon? The man tried calling his wife. Christine didn't answer either her landline or her cell phone. Kenneth was worried that something might have happened to her, but he had to finish an important meeting with colleagues or he could drive home to check on Christine. At that time, he was in the office with his 2 employees, helping with a real estate appraisal. After the meeting, Kenneth and his colleagues got into their car and drove home. They found Christine's car parked in front of the house, which meant she was home and hadn't left. The front door seemed to be open, which looked alarming since the family always locked their doors. The colleagues stayed outside while Kenneth went inside alone. He kept calling his wife's name and looking around, but Christine was nowhere to be found. The man quickly ran through the entire ground floor and noticed that the basement door was open. Kenneth looked in, then immediately ran outside and called his colleagues for help. All 3 ran in, and at his request, approached the staircase at the foot of which Christine Fitzhugh lay. The woman lay motionless, showing no signs of life, and it was suspected that she was either unconscious or already dead. The men in the house immediately called 911 to report the injured woman and request help. One employee and Kenneth went downstairs to check on the woman and then took turns performing CPR on her as instructed by the dispatch. They pronounced Christine Fitzhugh dead until paramedics arrived at the house around 1:40 p.m. By that time, police had already arrived and began examining the body and taking photos of the crime scene. The woman's body lay at the foot of the stairs, but had been turned over for first aid. As the three men were the last to see Christine alive, so they were immediately taken to the station for questioning. However, the husband adamantly refused to accompany the police. It took several minutes of persuasion before Kenneth agreed to testify. Nearby the body, clothes and a laundry basket were scattered, suggesting that the woman had fallen down the stairs and hit her head while bringing the laundry to the washing machine in the basement, which seemed obvious to everyone. Kenneth and two of his employees told a similar story. They came to the house after a call from the school principal and found the woman's body in the basement. Near the woman's head was a large pool of blood on the floor, and she had apparently hit her head on a large brass bell that was smeared with blood and lay literally just a few inches from her body in the basement. Several facts supported this version. The investigators found a half-eaten bun and a half-finished coffee on the dining table, a glass of water, and some other items belonging to the deceased. It looked like she had left her things for a while doing housework. From experience, however, the police know that things are not always as obvious as they seem at first glance, and that everything must be thoroughly checked. The officers spoke with Kenneth, and the man described in detail what he had done that morning until the alarm call from the school. Everything seemed fine until the police started asking further questions about the property the businessman had inspected that morning. The man was unable to answer these questions convincingly. He couldn't even name the exact address of the property the client wanted to buy, let alone describe it. He only claimed it was about 45 minutes away from the house. This seemed suspicious enough, but Kenneth looked very depressed and upset at that point. And maybe the confusion in his statement was due to the state of shock he was in. Later, when questioned again, the man changed. He began to shout, pound his fists on the table, and generally behave violently and inappropriately. When the police asked for permission to search the house to determine if the crime was related to a robbery, Kenneth initially agreed and filled out the necessary paperwork. However, before signing, the man abruptly changed his mind and refused permission, asking for time to think. He left the police station and went outside. When he returned, he changed his mind again and signed the form authorizing the officers to conduct the search. The man walked away. Later, other police officers returning from the crime scene reported finding a pair of white sneakers and blood-stained paper towels in Kenneth's car. This information alarmed the investigators. When the officers arrived to search the house, they asked the owner about the sneakers, and the deceased's husband confirmed he had them but couldn't find them in the shoe closet. One of the officers then showed photos showing the blood-stained sneakers and bloody paper towels in the car. The man immediately became nervous. He couldn't explain why his shoes looked like that or what they were doing in the car. Kenneth suggested it looked like a robbery. Perhaps the robbers wanted to steal the sneakers. But stealing bloody sneakers to bring them into the owner's car sounds absurd, unless it's a clumsy setup. A robbery was ruled out, since there were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was stolen from the house except the sneakers. All valuables were still there. So, either the woman let her killer in voluntarily, or he was in the house before she stopped by during her lunch break and had access to the house. Doubts grew about the deceased's husband, who had no alibi at the time of Christine's death. He behaved suspiciously, and disturbing evidence was found in his car. Crime scene investigators continued to examine the crime scene for clues and discovered another oddity. A right shoe was found on the stairs. but it was on the wrong side. The police found this strange because, even if the shoe had fallen from her right foot during the fall, it should have been on the right side of the stairs, not the left. Moreover, it was in such an inconspicuous place that it couldn't have been misplaced by accident. It looked like it had been placed there for staging. The other shoe was on the floor. In the meantime, the police learned that a courier had stood in front of the house with a package around noon on that fateful day. He knocked, but no one answered the door, and he left. Courier said he hadn't heard any suspicious noises at the door. Everything was quiet and peaceful, as if no one was home, even though the woman's car was parked in the driveway. Christine thus died between 11:30 a.m. and 12:50 p.m. A few hours after the crime scene investigation, Kenneth was summoned for another interview. This time, the suspect told a new story explaining the blood on the sneakers. He justified the presence of blood on the shoes by saying that his wife had severely injured her hand in the garden a few weeks before the tragedy, when he helped her treat the wound, and that he might have stained the shoes with blood. However, Kenneth could not say how the sneakers ended up in the car, or why he had forgotten them. Regarding the bloody paper towels, he said he had wiped his hands with them, after administering first aid to his wife. They could have unknowingly ended up in the car, when the widower went to check on the dogs left in the car. Considering the circumstances and the confusion that day, he might have thrown a bloody towel into the passenger compartment and simply forgotten to throw it away later. When asked by investigators where and how exactly his wife had injured her hand in the garden so severely that she bled and stained his sneakers and the towel, the man couldn't give an answer. His new story seemed dubious. Meanwhile, the deceased's body had already been sent for autopsy. Forensic experts made some interesting observations during the examination of the body. Christine had several head injuries, 3 on the top of her head, 3 on the back of her head. Behind her right ear was a deep stab wound with a foreign object. The skull was pierced and the brain was damaged. There were traces of blows to the face and neck, and her eyes were bleeding. Defense wounds were also found on her left arm, but there were no serious cuts on the arms that Christine could have sustained in the garden. It didn't match the husband's story. The medical examiner determined that the woman's fatal injuries were a slit wound to the head combined with strangulation. Obviously, all these injuries could not have been caused by falling down the stairs, but were inflicted on her forehand. The circumstances of the case suggest that Christine was held by the throat with one hand, while being hit on the head. According to the doctors, all this is unrelated to a fall down the stairs, resembles a deliberate murder. The brutality of the injuries inflicted suggests the personal nature of the crime. The woman died in another part of the house, and later her body was dragged into the basement, where a death by accident in the form of a fall down the stairs was staged. Police, who had read the autopsy report, were puzzled by the relatively small amount of blood at the scene, given that there were several wounds on the head, and much more blood should have been present. They suspected the basement was not the crime scene, but that she had been killed elsewhere, and then her body was brought here. The investigators went back into the house to examine the entire area more thoroughly. The last time, they had only inspected the basement. This was for a good reason. Overall, the house looked clean and raised no suspicion. However, it was now examined with luminol. Luminol is a substance that reacts with blood and glows blue. It can detect traces and residues of blood in any amount, even after many years and after multiple washes. In the kitchen, the entire floor glowed, meaning this was the crime scene. Blood traces were found on the walls, proving that the woman was attacked while drinking coffee at the dining table. Some bloodstains were found in the laundry room, and all the steps of the stairs glowed with blood, supporting the theory that the woman was pushed down the stairs after the murder. The suspicion was confirmed, as a trail of tiny glowing blood droplets led down to the basement. A bloody sole print was also found that matched the shape of the bloody sneakers found in Kenneth's car. Subsequently, the house was thoroughly cleaned to remove the blood. Apparently, the perpetrator had never heard of luminol, which thwarted his plans. In the end, it looked like the man had killed his wife and dismissed the case as an accident. The police also considered other people as suspects. For example, they found out that a criminal was working on a construction site near the house. He was summoned for questioning, but it turned out he had a solid alibi. On the day of the murder, he worked with other construction workers from morning to evening on the site, and several people confirmed his alibi, including the owners of the house who watched the workers. Moreover, the investigators doubted that if it had been an outsider, such as a burglar, he would not have cleaned the whole house, and the nature of the injuries suggested that it was a personal crime committed by a standing person. There were no other suspects, and everything pointed to the widower. The police then applied for a search warrant for the husband's car, and another important piece of evidence was found under the driver's seat. It was a man's shirt with a large red stain on the chest, presumably from blood. The sneakers, paper towel, and the shirt were sent to the lab for examination, where it was found that all these items contained the blood of the deceased. After that, Kenneth, a respectable and decent family man, became the prime suspect in the case. When the police officially asked him to provide an alibi for the period from 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., no one could ever confirm that the man was on the mentioned property that morning. It turned out that the colleagues he worked with in the office had met him shortly before the call from the principal and couldn't provide him with a reliable alibi either. The only person who could confirm the man's alibi was a business partner. She reported that she had been on the same property that morning, but hadn't seen Kenneth there. If the suspect had been on the property, she would have confronted him on the spot, but that didn't happen, which was strange. The police were certain that the dead woman's husband had not been on the property that morning, and that he had enough time to kill his wife, clean the crime scene, stage an accident, and calmly return to the office before the school principal called. A review of the widower's mobile phone showed that he was not on the property he spoke of, was near his house. In addition, the police checked Kenneth's calls that day. It turned out that he hadn't even tried to contact his wife after the call, as he had previously claimed. Investigators believed they had gathered enough evidence to charge the widower with the murder of his own wife. On May 19, 2006, the 56-year-old Kenneth Fitzhugh was arrested on suspicion of murder. He was held without bail, and his trial began in late July 2007. By this time, the prosecution had enough evidence to determine the motive. Ironically, in such a wealthy family, it was initially about money. Just a year before the bloody events, the family had gotten into financial trouble. Due to poor business decisions, Kenneth practically had no money left in his personal accounts. He couldn't even invest as he had done a few years earlier. His wife, on the other hand, had a substantial share from the real estate deals she had previously made. She also owned a lot of jewelry and valuables, not to mention a car, and of course she had taken out a life insurance policy for a considerable sum. Later, another possible motive for the murder became known, expressed by the prosecution. The deceased's eldest son, Justin, was not Kenneth's biological son. The woman became pregnant in the 1970s through an affair. Her lover was Robert Brown, once a close friend and business partner of the family. Back then, he did joint real estate deals with him. The man later developed problems with illegal substances. Despite financial support from the couple, he couldn't overcome his addiction, and they ended their friendship and partnership because the man became unreliable and dangerous. Christine also stopped communicating with him, but by then, the woman was already pregnant and didn't inform anyone. It wasn't until the court hearing that the eldest son, Justin, learned that the man who raised him was not his biological father. During the investigation, it turned out that the lover, Robert, had re-established contact with Christine only 5 months before her murder, informing her that he had overcome his addiction, had improved, loved her, and wanted to get in touch with his son. In her correspondence with him, the woman stated that she would tell her son the truth once he finished his studies. It was scheduled for May 20, 2000. Just 2 weeks earlier, Christine was brutally murdered. Robert had a reliable alibi at the time of the tragedy. He was in another city at work. As it turned out, Kenneth also did not know that he had been raising someone else's son all these years. Christine had kept a secret from him for 20 years, and this could have been the motive. The man found out about it a few weeks before the bloody events by accident, when he found his wife's correspondence with her former lover. He was probably angry about this news. At the trial, the accused admitted that shortly before the incident, he had learned the truth about his wife's affair and her illegitimate son from that affair, which made him angry. The man felt betrayed and harbored a grudge against his wife. All these years, he had believed that the family friend Robert was unconventional, as Christine had convinced him, even during their earlier friendship. It turned out that this was only necessary so that Kenneth would allow his wife to meet with him regularly without his personal presence, and so he wouldn't be jealous of his wife. They took advantage of this opportunity. Kenneth denied he had killed his wife out of jealousy. The man claimed he had considered a divorce, but would never have resorted to such extreme measures. The investigation even included a DNA test, which confirmed that the deceased's eldest son, Justin, was indeed Robert's son. The defense argued that the police had not properly investigated the other suspect. In fact, they had not even looked for them, as if they wanted to charge and imprison the murdered woman's husband from the beginning, which the prosecution denied. Several people were considered possible suspects, such as a courier, a construction worker, and others, but they all had a solid alibi and no motive for the murder. Everything initially pointed to the husband. All the evidence, the motive, and his behavior. Many people close to the family testified in court that it was an exemplary family where the spouses loved and cared for each other. Even that morning, while jogging, they looked happy. None of them believed that the husband could have killed Christine. Colleagues who were at the house when the body was found confirmed this. They stated that the husband had selflessly tried to save his wife by giving her first aid. This was very different from the actions of a criminal who wanted his wife's death. After the hearing, the jurors began their deliberations, which lasted almost 3 days. In the end, 6 men and 6 women agreed that Kenneth Fitzhugh was guilty of second-degree murder, as there was no evidence that he had planned the crime. They saw the fact that he was not the biological father of his eldest child as the motive for the murder, and that this was the trigger for his outburst of anger. The man was sentenced to life imprisonment, which can be suspended after 15 years. At the trial, he showed no remorse, but it seemed the widower had a hard time coping with the tragedy and the lies that had come to light. Kenneth Fitzhugh ultimately spent 12 years in prison, before being released in February 2020. His release was justified by the fact that the man suffered from Parkinson's disease and needed appropriate care. Moreover, at 68 years old, he posed no danger to others. Kenneth returned to Palo Alto and lived there for 8 months before he died on October 27, 2020. Kenneth was 69 years old, and until his last day, he maintained his innocence. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, and take care of yourselves. See you in the next video.